Hi there, listeners. This month's episode is a true treat. I had the wonderful opportunity to interview Pam Karlson, an artist who brought her skills and talents into the ecological landscaping industry to make a difference. A book that is embraced by the ecological landscaping community is Nature's Best Hope by Tallamy, and Pam exemplifies the concept mentioned in this book. So much so that she is actually mentioned in the book. A garden like Pam's really works and makes a difference in conserving birds, insects, and other critters. I would also like to mention an important program that Pam is enrolled in called Conservation at Home, which recognizes and certifies properties that demonstrate environmentally sound landscape practices. If you're interested in getting your property certified, there is a link in the description box below to the program's website. I would also like to apologize for the audio quality in this podcast. As mentioned in the podcast, her yard is close to O'Hare Airport and I-90, so the sound quality at some points, you could hear an airplane flying in the background, but I tried to capture the true environment she is working in. It just goes to show that even living in a city environment, if you leverage your yard the correct way and use ecological landscaping, you're able to bring a lot of wildlife into your yard. There's so much to learn in this podcast, so let's jump right into the interview. All right, today I'm sitting down with Pam Karlson. I met her at the ILCA Impact Conference. I heard a talk from her about birds in the garden, and immediately I was intrigued, and I knew I wanted to get to know more about it. So Pam, thank you for sitting down with us today.
Sure.
I guess I just want to start with your background. I know you have an artistic background, and I guess how that reflects on your garden, because it is amazing right now.
Oh, well, thank you. So my background, I went to art school for get into my career. I knew I wanted to be an artist. I've been an artist my entire life, so it was a no-brainer. When I decided to segue into landscape design and professional gardening, garden design is how I like to say it. I looked into the program at the Chicago Botanic Garden, enrolled, and did that for 5 years while I was still working. And what I found was that it was a really seamless transition because I'm using all the same principles that I learned in art school. So, design, composition, texture, color, unity, balance, repetition, all the things that you would put into a good design. It was surprisingly seamless. So instead of calling it a career switch, I actually call it career enhancement. Because to me, it's just using a different medium and then I'm passionate about plants and nature. So it's kind of brings everything together.
Right. And I could definitely tell it reflects here. We were just walking around your garden. You gave me the grand tour, and you were using words like texture and composition, and these colors go well together, so it really reflects in your garden. And I'm glad we have someone like you in the industry that could use artistic skill and make gardens look beautiful, because I think to get ecological landscaping in our yards and to get people on board, we need to make it look beautiful. And I think you really do a good job at that. How did you get so passionate about birds and gardening and stuff like that?
I've always loved animals, and I played outside. I didn't play with dolls. I played in dirt and soil, and it just I just always loved it so much. So when we bought our house, my husband and I wanted a little bit larger lot than the typical Chicago lot farther in the city. So this neighborhood offers a little bit larger lots, and I wanted to convert it over to a natural setting, like a habitat.
So the lot that we're on right now in Chicago, it is backed up to O'Hare Airport, 90.
Half a
block away. And I mean, how many bird species have you been able to identify here in this garden?
116. And we are also directly underneath the line, a runway path.
Right.
And then there's an alley in the back here, and then busy street 2 blocks over, and they actually use our street to cut over to get onto the Kennedy.
Oh, okay.
So it's noisy.
Right. So definitely not a place you would expect 116 bird species to come through, but if you use ecological landscaping and have features that attract birds, then you could be successful in this too. So what were the important steps in making this garden the way it stands today?
So the steps I took, I was working full time in my demanding career in advertising and marketing, and so I just did it bit by bit. I took on little pieces of the backyard. And I want to say one thing too. The reason I did it in the backyard is because our street does get pretty busy during rush hour, and I was concerned that if I attracted birds and baby birds, they would get smushed.
Right.
So that's why I focused on the backyard. I thought it was a safer haven. So I just started small and literally like close to the house. This was all grass, and then just bit by bit, as time allowed, I just kept enlarging and enlarging and enlarging. So the major component that I added 15 years ago was a water feature. And that boosted the number and the variety of birds, because a lot of the water birds now visit. And then also, too, a big key factor for me was planting a hawthorn tree in 1995. It blooms in the spring. In May, when the warblers are coming in, so the warblers feed in it like crazy, and then it produces a berry that they feed on migration back south, and then through the winter. There was more taller trees around us, so I wanted a medium size for our smallish lot. So
Right. Yeah, I think you bring up an important point with people. Like, people might see this garden and think, oh my gosh, like, it's daunting, like, I could never do this in my backyard, but I think an important part is to take it piece by piece and just do small spots every year, do a little bit of work here, do a little bit of work there, and then, over time, you said 15 years at least?
Oh, yeah. Well, we moved in 1991.
Yes.
So, yeah, in 95, the tree went in. And then also, too, just educating myself. Like, in the last 5 years when I went back to school, and I have to say the Botanic Garden program, I absolutely loved it. I learned a ton. I loved all the instructors. They were fabulous, and my brain just and I've met phenomenal people like Ken Williams and Christine Nye.
Yep.
And the women I work with are all really into the environment, so through them I've learned a ton. They're native gardeners themselves. I've been adding more and more and more natives.
It's so exciting.
It's just like the more you add, the more I added, the more diverse birds started coming, and it just makes you want to add more and more and more and more.
Right. You see them and you're like, oh my god, I want more.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely, that's amazing. What would be your best piece of advice for someone who's on board with ecological landscaping and wants to do it in their backyard but doesn't know where to start? What would be your best piece of advice for a person like that?
I would say start with just a small area. Do some research, do some reading, or talk. There's actually really good organizations out there, like Wild Ones.
Yep.
They get great speakers, and I've gone to several of their programs. So yeah, I think the main thing is to just start with a size piece of land that you can handle yourself.
Right. You have enough time and resources to dedicate to that little spot, and then you can move on to bigger and bigger pieces once you get that under control, because weed pressure could be daunting at first, but once your garden is settled, and it could lessen a lot.
Exactly.
Yes. My next question is, what do you personally think about ecological landscaping and the importance of bringing birds into our gardens?
I feel that it's very, 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 very important that people start gardening this way. I freelance for a couple different companies, and I'm out in a lot of people's gardens and properties. I do container gardening, and I also do garden design, freelance. And some of these properties that I see are completely sterile. And wow, it just blows my mind. It makes me really sad. And I think there's actually probably more of those, unfortunately, than gardens like this. My hope and my goal is to get the word out there that it's so important to get these plants in your backyard or front yard and help the birds, because they are massively declining. I mean, you probably saw the headline in the Tribune last fall that was 3 billion, we're down 3 billion birds. Wow. Insects, same thing, like huge decline. So it's our responsibility to give back to the earth and to give back to the younger generation so that they can enjoy the beauty and learn about all these beautiful creatures.
I feel like we've tortured the earth so much as humans that we need to give back a little bit and, you know, help improve it for the animals and also for future generations, like you said, so they can learn too and have these awesome experiences that you had as a kid and I've had as a kid. Just being out in nature and seeing all, you know, learning so much and observing so many things. And I think it's really important for kids to get out in nature. So, let's keep doing that.
Well, and it's really good for your psyche. I mean, for me, it's been my therapy.
Yeah.
You know, after a super stressful day at work and coming out here and just gardening and, or getting up really super early in the morning before work. I mean, my old neighbors used to call me the Midnight Gardener. I was gardening before work and then after work. And that, what you said too, that was my goal with this empty backyard was, when we moved in, was to give it back to nature.
What's the maintenance like here in your garden?
It's less now than it used to be because now it's getting more mature. So once the plants really start to grow in and touch each other and you can like get those ground covers in, it like crowds out the weeds and so it's really less maintenance now than it used to be. To me too, I enjoy doing it. So some people might not enjoy any maintenance, but you can hire people to do the maintenance for you.
Right. So you talked about using ground covers. What kind of ground covers do you use here and why?
I'm getting more and more and more into ground cover. So I love the native wild ginger, pussy toes, and I have a native sedum. The ground cover layer, and that I'm getting more into that, trying to cover more now because it helps suppress the weeds. And then it also just adds a whole nother layer of foraging opportunities and egg-laying opportunities like the pussy toes. I loved that plant as a child. I used to see it camping in southern Illinois. And then when I found it at a native plant sale, I thought, I'm going to try it next to the patio, kind of in a sand, there's sand base here. And then turns out this American lady butterfly laid eggs on it, and sure enough, we got a caterpillar. So that's absolutely fascinating. I saw Claudia West at a Wild Ones conference 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago. And she was also at the Impact Conference.
Yep.
And one thing she was really talking about was adding a lot of calyxes in that ground layer there. You pop them in because it breaks down the soil. It really helps condition the soil. So I've really focused a lot more on calyxes too, adding those in. And that helps control the weeds.
Yes, they do a great job at holding it down, stopping weeds from growing in there. So I think they're a great choice as a ground cover and just that bottom base layer in a garden.
And the beautiful texture too. They add a lot of interest to the garden. One of my favorites is the Asarum canadensis, the native wild ginger. And why I love that one so much is that it blooms really early in the spring, and I've literally seen ovenbirds walking around the patch, foraging around, because they're ground feeders. The ground layer is really, really important for the ground feeding birds that don't go to feeders, and they really forage on the ground.
So what kind of rare or endangered birds have you been able to attract?
So the most unusual we've had woodcock that I've seen, I mean, I'm just, what the heck am I missing? When I'm not back here,
right?
Not home, because I work, and so like this is just when I can get out here. So the woodcock has been here twice. First time it came was the Cubs won the World Series, and it was the night that they turned around the World Series. So I was like, "Ooh, this is a good luck charm." And so then they came again. One came again last year, and it spent the entire day here, just sunning and field foraging. So that was really fun. I've had green heron, that's pretty cool. I've had a white-winged crossbill landed on that rock over there by the pond.
Oh, wow.
Unfortunately, I didn't have my camera with me, but my husband Mike was out here, and he saw it too. So that was really cool. Blue-winged warbler, that's pretty unusual for a backyard. We get great blue herons back here. trying to think what other unusual ones. Just tons of warblers. And then this year was the black-billed cuckoo. It's really exciting.
That's awesome. At the Impact Conference, Pam was able to put all these birds on the projector with beautiful images that you've taken, and it was amazing to see. That made me so happy. I was like, wow, this is really awesome what she's doing here. So
yeah, I try to document as many birds with photography as possible because it's proof. And I mean, because it's pretty remarkable.
Do you always have your camera out here then, ready to go?
My camera out here, ready to go. Ever since that white-winged crossbill, it's so hard to say that bird.
Mm-hmm.
Ever since then, I tried to keep my camera out here at all times.
So what's your best advice, or what are your best tips for attracting birds here? I know the water feature was a big one.
Yeah, it's just providing, food, water, and shelter. So that's the three main components. So you want to, as far as plant material goes, it's important to have nectar producing, seed producing, berries, and covering as much of the season as possible, and then leaving the foliage up through the winter because they continue to feed. Just a simple bird bath. Birds are attracted to the sound of water, though. So if you can put a bubbler in there, or you can just do less expensive forms of water features, just like a fountain or pondless waterfall. I mean, there's all different levels. So shelter, just safe places for the birds to forage. So you want to plant in layers with the ground cover layer, perennial layer, shrub layer, and then trees, and then tall trees, which the tall trees you can borrow from your neighbor. So yeah, that's the main components, and then also no pesticide, including herbicide.
How does it affect the birds if you say no herbicide? For people who don't know the dangers of using herbicides or pesticides in their yard.
Well, it's just bad, really, really bad for them. The more natural you can treat your garden, the better. Like, I don't even fertilize. And if you have a balanced ecosystem and you garden in a way where, like, I just chop up the stems in the spring, after I'm sure most of the insects are out. Chop all that stuff up and just leave it on the bed. And it might look messy, but the plants grow up through it and you can't even tell. So it's just, the pesticides are killing the insects, and the birds need the insects. The insects are a huge part of most birds' diet, especially during nesting season. So we need those insects. Mm-hmm. And if you have a balanced ecosystem, like we're sitting out here and we're not getting bit by mosquitoes.
Nope.
We have mosquitoes, but the birds are eating the mosquitoes, the dragonflies are eating the mosquitoes, the bats come out at night and they feast over here. There's at least 3. It's a lot for the city. The chimney swifts, the hummingbird every night does fly catching. He's probably catching mosquitoes up there.
Yeah.
We have 3 hummingbirds this summer. They've been here all summer long. So, it's just really, really important to not use pesticides.
Yeah, that brings up a good scientific concept called biological magnification for our listeners. Yeah, so I guess if you spray your plants or your garden or anything, your grass with pesticides, that obviously could be taken up by, if it's on a plant that a caterpillar eats, it could be taken up by the caterpillar. It goes in their tissues. A bird comes down and say they eat 10, 12 caterpillars, they have a big pesticide load in their tissues then, and that leads to early death, probably problems for the birds. So if you think you're not spraying a lot in your yard, it adds up when it gets to higher levels of the food chain. It gets trapped in their tissues and causes a whole bunch of health problems, and that's a big reason why Silent Spring, which was written by Rachel Carson back in the day about DDT, that's why we stopped spraying DDT everywhere, because it was getting trapped in enormous amounts in birds.
That's great.
Yeah.
And you have the science end of it.
Yeah.
I'm not a science
No, you explained it really well, actually. I was
I'm not
like,
a science major,
she's
but...
going to say it. But yeah,
and then
it's perfect.
Another thing, too, with fertilizers, I've been in wildlife rescue for over 16 years now. I don't do it quite as much right now because I'm so busy, but I volunteer with a licensed rehabilitation center. And fertilizers, I've seen how it affects, like people that put a ton of fertilizer on their lawn and the robins are eating from there, they get poisoned from it, and they're kind of like they're drunk, and so that's like, ugh, that's another thing.
That's so nasty.
Yeah, and then it leaches into the water system, the algae bloom, and I mean, you probably know it more on a scientific level what it actually does, but I've seen what it does to the birds through wildlife rescue.
Right. The fertilizers are rotten because they end up in our waterways and they go through our watersheds and end up in, if anybody sees a lake and it's filled with algae, that's probably an area that uses heavy fertilizers. And what it does is it causes the algae to overbloom because fertilizers have nutrients. I think nitrogen is a big one, nitrogen fertilizer. So the algae lives off of that. They need it as nutrients, and so it causes them to overbloom. What happens then is it causes fish to die. It's called massive fish kills because the algae takes up so much oxygen, dissolved oxygen, that it ends up starving the fish of oxygen. Then they end up dying. That's another bad aspect of using fertilizers on your lawn. And people don't really think about the cascading effects of what they're doing to the yard. But it adds up. And if we could just eliminate that or find ways to minimize that, it's really helping the earth.
Well, and I'll add one more thing too about I do have some lawn here. I've reduced the amount of it, but what I do have is just completely natural. So there's tons of clover in there, and other people would call them weeds, but it stays pretty green, and it's the birds really, the palm warblers for some reason love feeding on the lawn. I don't know why, but they have a lot of foraging going on in there too. So
that's good. Are you optimistic about ecological landscaping? I know you mentioned earlier that you go to these clients and they have, mostly sterile yards, but are you encouraged or optimistic about the future of ecological landscaping?
I was born an optimist. It's just my default setting is optimism, and I feel optimistic that and maybe part of that is because I've seen and done it myself. I mean, I really did very little reading even. Like, I've learned way more now that I went back to school. I've seen what it does and what a huge impact it can make with just a tiny little plaque here. Well, small. And so that gives me hope and optimism. And then too, does really seem like the word is getting out there slowly but surely. I feel like we have a chance to make an impact and change things and maybe reverse things a little bit. And hopefully, I'm really, really hoping that the younger generation, the kids coming up, are going to be even more on board with it. So,
right. I hope that too.
I'm hopeful. I am very, very hopeful.
I think it's really picking up speed, though. I think even on CNN, I've seen articles about, ecological landscaping, and so I'm encouraged at least by that. How do we get there? How do we get people on board to ecological landscaping and doing this to their backyard? How do we get people on board to that?
Invite your friends over to sit in your backyard and walk around the garden, and that, like our neighbor 2 doors down, I feel like they've been coming and walking over here for years and seeing the garden and admiring it, and they've gotten more and more into it too. I gave them some natives, and they're super into birds now, and they've expanded their garden with more natives. They've come to see my bird gardening talk 3 times.
Oh, wow.
So that's part of it. Just tell everybody as much as you can about it. Education. Like for myself, I never planned on doing public speaking. It just sort of happened because I was asked by one of the women I work with to put a presentation together for environmental seminar she was coordinating on environmentally responsible gardening. So I did, and then it resonated with people, and then got out there word of mouth. So for me, even though I never planned on doing public speaking, I think it's important to get out there and spread the word that way. For myself, it's something I can do. Take classes and read and yeah, just preach.
Right. I would say it's definitely, this person, that does ecological landscaping, they have natives. Okay, you could go to their backyard and take some and take them to your home and have it spread. So I think it's definitely more of like a word of mouth type thing, movement. And also with the Botanic Garden right here, we have so many great organizations in the Chicagoland area that have seminars even right now with coronavirus. There's like Zoom meetings about ecological landscaping and using natives. So that's really encouraging too. Like the movement is still going on despite everything that's happening right now. And I think it's a great way to get outside and enjoy your own backyard while you're quarantining. Yeah.
And Morton Arboretum is another great source.
Morton Arboretum.
It once you get into it, it's really endless. Of course, there's so many great authors out there, great books out there. Doug Tallamy, love his books. Yeah, there's so much resources out there, and certainly during the pandemic, what I have found, people are embracing gardens even more. I mean, swamped all through. I've been working throughout this entire lockdown. Yeah, because the landscape industry was considered essential, and it seems to me people are really wanting the nature now to come to their homes, you know, and so that's cool. Maybe that's a positive result of this crazy time. I know, like for myself, they did the very first backyard big day this year. I sat here the entire day birding in my backyard. I mean, it takes time to do that.
That's awesome. That is great. Wow.
So those are really fun to do. Bird counts, getting out there and volunteering at the habitat restoration sites. Right now, most of them are shut down. Maybe just some of the stewards are doing. Once this is lifted, that's another great way to get your feet wet. And the stewards are super knowledgeable. And I've learned a ton. And I haven't done too many of those. I would like to do more. But when I'm gone, boy, those guys are a fountain of information.
Right. Definitely. I would say if you volunteer, I could even speak for this, if you volunteer, you will learn so much from the people who have been doing it for years upon years. They are so passionate, and I'll be able to pass this information on to the future generation. Volunteering is, I would say, very important. I love volunteering, and, it's a great experience.
It is, and it's great exercise. And then, like, another radio station, which I wasn't aware of the Mike Novak show.
Yeah.
Until, like this world opened up to me. I was invited to be on it last year for the Impact Conference. That show's got all sorts of great topics that they talk about every Sunday. That's a good source. And then there's the Wild Things Conference.
Yes.
So I've gone to that. I actually spoke at that one the last time they had it. And I attended the one prior to that. And it gets you really, really motivated when you go to these seminars. It's so uplifting, and you're in a room with, I don't know, sometimes 300 plus people.
Yeah.
Or like wild things. It's like a couple thousand people.
Right.
And that motivates, that gives you hope.
Can you go into the Chicago Botanic Garden classes for anybody that's interested in something like that?
So you don't have to go through the whole certification program that I wanted to. It's long, but I felt the quality of the classes was really good. I mean, I learned a lot. But you could just take one here and there. You don't have to do the whole certification. And I'm sure, I would imagine to also like down Morton Arboretum, like my mom growing up, we lived closer to the Arb.
Okay.
And my mom took classes when I was a kid. So those both are great resources. And education, the more you learn, what I find, the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know.
Yes.
And so it's like this never-ending learning, and it's fabulous.
Right.
That makes it really exciting as well. So yeah, I would recommend the Botanic Garden, and certainly the Morton Arboretum.
So what are you currently working on, I guess? What's some fun things that you're working on right now?
I'm working on, I freelance for a company doing some garden design. Currently I'm doing a garden design for an old farmhouse.
Oh.
It was built in 1855.
Wow, where at?
Evanston.
Oh my gosh.
So that's going to be really fun. They want a lot of natives and attract pollinators, and I did another one for the same gal, a property in Park Ridge. I was thinking of Doug Tallamy on this one because this is what he hopes people do. This lady, she lives in her house and her mom lived next door. She passed away. I guess the house was not in very good shape. Mm-hmm. They knocked it down and they're building a garden now in this empty lot. So that was really fun to design for because I just chock full of lots of native. You can do the bigger species. So that was really fun. And then I worked for another company doing container gardening, mostly in the North Shore. And then as far as I take freelance too, on my own, some of my own clients. And then I'm also doing an online class with the Botanic Garden.
Oh, okay.
So there was 2 that were scheduled, but they had to cancel because of COVID. We're going to go forward with one in November. I think it's November 21st, and it's going to be on the 25 most common backyard birds.
Okay.
So I'll just kind of go into like what you can expect to see, a little bit about each bird. I'm definitely going to incorporate gardening into that as well. Mm-hmm. That I'll be working on this fall. And then one for hopefully in next year, if we're out of this, I would love to do, they have another class they want me to do. It's just a one-shot, couple hour class on gardening for hummingbirds. Oh. So we get quite a few hummingbirds here. So there's just some specific things you can do to try to attract hummingbirds. And then I also have the one that they offer, it's called Birds in the Garden.
Right. That's the one I saw. That was great. So what's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
I don't have a website because this really has all just been word of mouth. But I do have, you can give me my email. I'm on Facebook, just Pam Karlson with a K. I'm on Instagram.
Well, thank you so much for this interview. And I hope to have you on again, honestly, for another podcast. So thank you so much.
Sure. Spread the word. The good bird word.
Yep, the good bird word.